And I can also stand here. Welcome, everyone. Dear esteemed delegates, panelists, and also friends and colleagues who are joining us online, thank you for coming to this session, the Climate Change and Mental Health, Understanding Risks and Empowering Opportunities. I'm Sane Okamoto. I'm a psychologist, researcher from United Nations University. To keep up with the great momentum of the very first Health Day at the COP yesterday, today's our session is trying to understand the risks of climate change on mental health and exploring opportunities to address these challenges. Taking care of mental health is not trivial. Mental health affects how we think, feel, behave. It also affects how we handle stress, how we also relate and interact with others, or how we make our life decisions. It's also not only individual health, it impacts your family, friends, and your community. So it is about community health. However, most of the country allocate a relatively smaller budget to health systems, and in that small budget, only about 2% are given to mental health support. So the situation is even more severe in a place where the health system are inadequate. It's considered that 1 billion people worldwide are currently living with mental health conditions, and many of them don't have any support. So there is an absolute lack of capacity with coping the existing needs, even without considering climate change. Climate change is the health and mental health challenges, but it's also an opportunity for public health. This session is organized by these colleagues of 3 UNU institutes. So Dr. Nidhi Nagabatla, she will be the moderator. So she's from UNICEF. And then myself, I will be a facilitator of this session. And then we have 2 more colleagues from UNEHS Bonn in Germany, the Kariuki Weru and Robert Oakes, who have been also supporting us for coordinating this session. We have been working together as the member of Climate Resilience Initiative that's triggered by the 2021 West European flood. Today's session will have threefold. First one is introduction, and then second one we have 3 sets of panels, and then third one will be open discussion and closing. Introduction will be given by Mr. Tiriti Marwala. He's a professor and doctor and rector of United Nations University, and also Under Secretary General of the United Nations. And opening remarks, we expect to have Mr. Diarmid Campbell-Landrum, Unit Head of Climate Change and Health from WHO. And then first panel, we have UN Voice. So we have Mr. Yasushi Katsuma, the Academic Program Advisor, Global Health Diplomacy and Governance for Planetary Health from UNUIAS. And then we have Ms. Paloma Escudero, the Global Special Advisor for Climate Advocacy, UNICEF. And we have Ms. Jyoti Martha Philip. She's Executive Secretary, Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution from INC Secretariat. And then we have Ms. Jekulin Lipi. She's a Global Focal Point and Sendai Children Youth Group from UNMGCY. And after that, the second panel will be consisting about insights from research. First, we have Ms. Emma Lawrence. She is the lead of Climate Care Center and mental health lead, Imperial College London from United Kingdom. And also she's representing Connecting Climate Minds. And then we have the voice from the field, Ms. Kekashan Basu. She is the founder of Youth Climate Action organization, Green Hope Foundation, Canada. And the third panel will be starting with the councillor, Miss Marianne Overton, Lincolnshire County Council and North Kesteven District Council from United Kingdom. She is also leader of independent group and vice chairman of the local government association, Council of European Municipalities and Regions. And then we have Ms. Charlotte Scheerens. She's the Belgian delegation to COP, and she's a researcher at Ghent University in Belgium. And the last panel will be Ms. Katie Hayes. She's a senior policy analyst from Health Canada and Canada. First, I would like to give a floor to Mr. Tirthi Marwala, our rector of United Nations University.
Former executive director of the World Health Organization once said, "A ruined planet cannot sustain human lives in good health. A healthy planet and healthy people are two sides of the same coin," close quote. We often conceive of the physical health impacts of climate change, but there has been a wealth of research in recent years on the impact of climate change on mental health, with studies demonstrating a clear and a direct correlation. The critical intersection is a realm where the United Nations University is actively engaged. We have recognized the profound importance of acknowledging the heightened risks faced by marginalized population and those residing in fragile and conflict-affected settings. These are contexts where the nexus between climate change and mental health is particularly pronounced. As a think tank within the United Nations system, the United Nations University believes embracing innovation is imperative to overcoming these challenges and shaping the future, a future that may not only mitigate the adverse effects of climate change on mental health, but also empowers individuals to foster resilience within communities. We must explore the application of artificial intelligence in digital technologies as tools to spur innovative solutions, particularly in bridging the prevailing gaps between the global south and the global north. The UN University is well poised to lead this endeavor, driven by our commitment to fostering a world where the harmony between the environment and mental well-being is not just a goal, but a shared reality. This is our responsibility to present to the future generations. I have no doubt that this session will be important for defining this path. To paraphrase the words of Helen Berry, the inaugural professor of climate change and mental health at the University of Sydney, we must acutely mindful that our capacity for change, and in this case for climate action, is predicated on strong mental health. I thank you very much.
Well, this was some starting words from our leadership of United Nations University, and we are working with different UN agencies to see that the climate health nexus also figures focus on mental health and psychosocial well-being. With this word, I'd like to first take the opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Nidhi Nagabatla. I'm the program lead of Nature, Climate, and Health. The integrate nexus between these three aspects of humanity cannot be disregarded anymore. And with that, we have, with my colleagues at United Nations University, but also at other UN agencies, we are trying to push that mental health focus financing programs and policies should also feature in climate action and climate agenda and policy setting. With those words, I'd also like to take this opportunity to put my UN colleagues on spotlight. I know that different UN agencies have taken note of, acknowledged this, taken note of the need for dedicated attention, acknowledgement, and addressing this nexus in a way that it targets specific groups, vulnerable communities, children, youth, women, girls, and other stakeholders who are directly or indirectly exposed and are impacted and have no support system for mental health and psychosocial well-being. Starting, and I'm glad we have a mixed panel, and I'll maybe take a sequence and start with Ms. Jyoti Mathur-Philip, the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee on Plastic Pollution. And perhaps, Jyoti, in your example of negotiating plastic pollution, we have come a long way. That experience of negotiating something for a positive change, how do you see that we can benefit from it by negotiating something for mental health and well-being, that we see communities are impacted by environmental degradation and now the cascading impacts of climate change?
Sure. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here and for you all to listen to me. I'm very humbled by that. So we are right in the middle of negotiating a new treaty on tackling plastic pollution. We have a deadline by the end of next year to complete negotiations and adopt it in 2025 at a diplomatic conference so that it is opened for signature, in 2025 itself. While we're doing this, we have been noticing that a lot of our submissions from member states, from stakeholders, are around health. Not particularly about mental health, but I think there is, it's not so granular as yet, but when you see studies, when you see studies of the impact that plastic has, well, there are no studies as yet on impact of plastic, but there are enough studies that are telling us that there is, plastic in our bodies, it's in our fetuses, it's in our brain, it's in our heart, it's in the endocrine systems are being impacted. I'm sure that will lead at some point when somebody does a study on this to mental health. So one of the things that we are talking about very much in this treaty is that there should be no potential impact on health, any kind of health, by plastic. So therefore, our objective would be to look at it from a health and environment perspective, not just an environment perspective. So that is a lesson I think we have learned over the years, 30 years from the Rio Conventions. We can say now that we are already taking care of health and not, kind of running behind. We also, another lesson we have learned is to have a large number of observers already involved in the treaty making. So they don't come in after the treaty is done, but their voices are heard during the time a treaty is being negotiated. And that's another lesson we learned from the other treaties. The last one was 10 years ago, which is Minamata on mercury. But the ones that we all know about are the 3 Rio Conventions, of which UNFCCC is one, biodiversity is the other one, the Convention on Biodiversity, Biological Diversity, and the last one is UNCCD, which is the Convention on Desertification. So we have learned a lot from that, and we are already looking into impacts of health. We're looking into the voices of stakeholders, and these are 2 big changes in innovation that we're trying to do in treaty making. So I'll say thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti, for providing us an overview of interventions and pathways that are being adopted, and perhaps there's a lesson for us to use similar experiences in negotiating some kind of agenda for mental health in the climate discourse. With that statement, I'll maybe also invite Mr. Yasushi Katuma, the Academic Program Advisor of Global Health Diplomacy and Governance for Planetary Health at a sister organization in UNU, Japan. I want to ask you, Mr. Katuma, that considering the intersectionality of factors like gender, age, socioeconomic status, and can climate policy be tailored to recognize and adopt health diplomacy discussions to make it more inclusive, representative, and a collective agenda?
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for your kind introduction. I'm here as a UN observer, so I'd like to share my few observations looking at the global health diplomacy and climate diplomacy. So my first observation is about climate in global health diplomacy. 15 years ago, at the 2008 WHO World Health Assembly, climate change and health was one of the agenda items at the WHO. However, there was no mention of mental health in the resolution. And also in the following decade, no explicit reference was made to mental health in the resolutions and decisions made by the World Health Assembly or the Executive Board meetings. More recently, there was a resolution, Health, Environment, and Climate Change, Plan of Action on Climate Change and Health in Small Island Developing States, drafted in 2019 and finalized this year. In the paragraph 24, there was a small mention of mental health in parentheses as part of the non-communicable diseases. So maybe this is not sufficient attention paid to mental health and psychosocial support needed for the people affected by climate-induced disasters. So this is my first observation, and later I'd like to make some suggestions how we should approach these situations. My second observation is about health in climate diplomacy. So I'm excited, just like you, that declaration was adopted yesterday for the first time on climate change and health. So this is really exciting, and I was excited to read the manuscript. Of course, this can be traced back to the COP26. The first health program was promoted, and one of the initiatives was to support countries in developing countries to come up with resilient health systems. The countries conduct climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessment, what's called V&As, and then develop a health national adaptation plan, which forms part of the national adaptation plan. I think more than 70 countries are working on their national adaptation plan, and of course the health national adaptation plan as a chapter of their national plan. I think it's worthwhile to pay attention to how much of mental health has been incorporated in the national health adaptation plan. So I think we can celebrate that yesterday's declaration of climate and health, there was a mention of mental health. I just read one of the objectives, promoting a comprehensive response to address the impacts of climate change on health, including, for example, mental health and psychosocial well-being, loss of traditional medical knowledge, loss of livelihoods and culture, and climate-induced displacement and migration. So I think we have achieved something, but I think we still have a way to go to mainstream mental health in our health in climate diplomacy. Let me share my third observation. Mental health and psychosocial support for vulnerable people hit by sudden onset disasters, such as typhoons or floods. Emergency road normal protective supports increase the risks of various problems and tend to amplify pre-existing problems of social injustice and inequality. For example, floods typically have a big impact on poor people who live in dangerous places. Mental health and psychosocial problems in emergencies may be social or psychological in nature. Problems of a social nature include pre-emergency social problems such as extreme poverty or belonging to minority groups, etc. Emergency-induced social problems such as family separation, disruption of social networks, disruption of community structures, etc. Sometimes humanitarian work may induce social problems, unfortunately, and undermining of community structures or traditional support mechanisms. Similarly, problems of psychological nature include pre-emergency problems such as severe mental disorder or alcohol abuse can be examples. Emergency-induced problems such as grief, non-pathological distress, depression, and anxiety disorders, including PTSD. Also, humanitarian assistance may create some problems, anxiety due to the lack of information about food distribution, for example. And this actually comes from my own experience of a few decades ago, working as a humanitarian worker in Afghanistan as a UNICEF staff. Also, not everybody has significant psychological problems. Many people show resilience. There are various interacting social, psychological, and biological factors that influence whether people develop psychological problems or exhibit resilience in the face of adversity. We already have some guidelines, including the Interagency Standing Committee guidelines on mental health and psychosocial support or in emergency settings. So for rapid sudden onset emergencies, we have some existing guidelines which should be probably reviewed from the perspective of mental health. Fourth observation is mental health and psychosocial support for vulnerable people hit by slow onset disasters, such as sea level rise or desertification. I'd like to ask my colleagues whether do we have any globally agreed guidelines on psychosocial support, mental health support to those being hit by slow onset disasters. Number 5, involvement in climate change action. We probably try to encourage people affected by disaster to be agents or actors, making a difference, possibly becoming a leader to tackle with the problems they face. There are many beneficial mental health outcomes by actively coping with the situation through climate action. And I have such experiences in Afghanistan. Potential distress by confronting the scale of the problem can be existing. The problem is so big, they feel powerless in many cases by understanding the situation they are facing. It's not just about humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, but of course climate change is something many people feel beyond their control. So further research may be necessary to understand how climate action may promote and protect mental health and psychosocial well-being rather than putting them in further distress. Let me summarize what I said based on my 5 observations. I've already mentioned a few suggestions, but in response to my first observation, I'd like to see more action, health diplomacy, to mainstream mental health at the WHO World Health Assembly by encouraging the member states. So that's my first kind of recommendation. Recommendation 2 is about health in climate diplomacy. So when the parties to UNFCCC or the Paris Agreement conduct climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessments, and then develop a health national adaptation plan, we probably want to remind them to include mental health and psychosocial support in the adaptation plan. So that's kind of a concrete suggestion responding to my second observation. The third recommendation For sudden onset disasters, we currently have ISSC guidelines on mental health and psychosocial support in emergency setting, which was, I think, created in 2007, more than 1 decade ago. And it may be updated, incorporating mental health aspects, which is not clearly, explicitly not updated according to the most recent research. Number 4, for slow onset disasters, I'm not so sure whether we have a good global guidelines how to respond to such situations, and we may want to agree on the minimum standards globally. And if you have something going on, please let me know, because I'm not aware of the initiatives taken. Number 5, young people's involvement in climate change action may bring about dual impact on them. So how to maximize the potential beneficial outcomes to them and how to minimize the potential distress should be further discussed. So I don't have any answer to this, but I think we need further research on this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Karsuma. In summary, we need more health in climate diplomacy and more climate in health diplomacy. So with that, I'd like to also shift my attention to our young climate and health diplomat, should I say that? Ms. Jekulin Lipi, the global focal point for Sendai Children and Youth Group, UNMGCY. And I'd like to ask you, Jekulin, in my own experience of working with communities as a researcher, as a scientist, I've seen that the young people are most disillusioned by the factor of uncertainty that climate change has brought on board or in their lives by default. And I think you work a lot with a certain age group. Would you like to share some reflections of experiences and insights that you have encountered?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunities. So with the start, let me take you back to my hometown. I would say my ancestral land, which is called as Majuli. It is a small island, I would say a river island. Also, it's not a small anymore. It has becoming smaller and smaller because of the soil erosion and continuous floods. That's where the problem started. So in the childhood, we lost our land because of the soil erosion, and we are being forced to move to another place. So I lost my school friends. I have to shift to a new school. My dad was jobless. There was a lot of disruption to cope up with the new area, new community, new set of friends. So I was a kid. I was trying to cope up, trying to make friends, but with some time, I would say years, I was able to adapt. So with this, it has a huge impact, although it's a secret. I haven't shared with my parents because I don't know what to do, but I tried to cope up by myself. Now, coming to the youth perspective, now when I am growing, I feel like an anxiety or a fear of, again, the uncertainty I would be facing because of the increase in the climate-induced disasters. I would say each year we face floods, and I don't see any sustainable solutions to it. We are being forced to adapt or being forced to move to another new place. So it's a loss of a stable future for me. That's the risks or the problems that I foresee. So in terms of the opportunities, I would always like to see the opportunities or the what we can do to make it a better and not to lose hope. So to create an equitable, just and sustainable society, and also to bring more gender equalities, because as a girl child, I did face a lot of it during my childhood. So few of my recommendations I would request is to have cross-sector connections I wish all the UN entities could have a networking event or networking sessions instead of having different pavilions and side events, so that they could all work together towards a common goal. I really appreciate Nidhi to bringing together all the UNU universities. I wish UN entities could do that too. The second is the academic, bringing the academic disciplines to bring more new partnership and connecting with the practitioners and connecting it to the local communities. My third is a request to the people who is in the audience who have money. I would request the financial institutions and the donor agencies to have the funding or the initiatives which are sustainable and who are creating a real impact at the local community by building that connection or engaging with the local communities, because without the local communities, we cannot build the resilience. With this, I would like to thank Nidhi for this opportunity, and over to you.
Thank you, Jekulin. I think your words have touched our hearts, and we need to speed up action as experts, as institutions, as member states in the room. Now I'd like to also emphasize that we have done a lot in terms of science, we have done a lot in terms of policy. We are falling short on interfacing, the science-society interfacing, the science-policy interfacing. Perhaps if we speed up, we'll see more action and more delivery of outcomes targeted to at least young people who are feeling the brunt from different fronts. I will now shift my attention to Ms. Paloma Escorado, Global Special Advisor for Climate Advocacy at UNICEF. Paloma, give us an insight of how the agency is dealing with the emerging challenges for specific stakeholder groups, mainly children, youth, women, girls, and what insights can you bring to this discourse so we can note and take it to policy recommendations, maybe perhaps integrate into our research so we can have evidence backing our arguments.
No. Thank you so much, and I'm so happy I'm speaking after Jekulin. I think this brings what perhaps this COP is marking as a shift from previous COPs. I think that in previous COPs, all the focus was on energy, on infrastructure. There was never any COP has made any commitment or reference to children. I mean, I'm talking 28 COPs, despite the preamble of the Paris Agreement, specifically talking about human rights and child rights. So humans have been totally invisible, and children specifically have been totally invisible. I think that now, this COP, we are moving into adaptation. We know that the failure or success of this COP is going to be on recommitting to the 1.5. That's the only way forward, and that's the only way to deal with what we are discussing today. But also, the success or the failure of this COP will be measured if finally and once for all, the 1 billion children suffering every day the worst impact of the triple planetary crisis are recognized, and we start talking about how to protect and invest in them. And I say that because even in the health declaration, even in the mental health, there's no mention to children. And by the way, children are not little adults. And the mental health support we are talking for children and young people are not the same as the overall mental health approach on health. And that's truly the approach that UNICEF and many, many partners are really trying to operationalize on the field. And of course, we are before, during, and after every single humanitarian setting, the floods, the drought, the cyclones, but also we are in any other setting where 2.2 billion children are already living in a different world, they have to adapt too. So when we say, of course, climate is changing our planet, climate is changing our children and our young people. It's a different life, and they have to cope with it. I don't know where you all come from, but think about the past 6 months. I doubt you have not suffered a heat wave, a fire, a cyclone, unbearable floods. So all of us have to cope. And I think that in a way that's a huge challenge, because that means that we have to be starting to incorporate those impacts in the way we are bringing up our children, and in the way we are really empowering and accompanying young people in their transition in life. But also, perhaps it's going to be what is going to make the trick, because now we cannot say any decision maker in COP has not experienced how the climate crisis is impacting their own children. It doesn't matter if they are in the US, in Canada, with the fires, and I live in New York, and I was living with orange ceilings or orange air for 3 weeks. And I have to explain that to my 3 boys. Yeah, is the sky going to be blue again? Well, at some point. But at the moment, just put the mask. That's what we have to tell them. So, very important here, I would say, is, of course, mental health in the most serious occasion is a health medical issue, no doubt, and we will have to be investing on that. But also, in a lot of cases, mental health is going to be changing behaviors, educating, preparing, bringing resilience. We have to work with parents, and I would say that at the moment, UNICEF has a global parenting portal with 100 million visits a year. The most popular portal is when we publish anything around mental health, and also followed by climate, I have to admit. Parents are lost. Parents don't understand panic attacks. Parents don't understand this anxiety. I think we all lived that through COVID. But the day-to-day of the air pollution, of the closing of schools for weeks with no end, when there are floods or cyclones, all that is having a toll, and parents have no answers for the kids, how they can help them. Very important that we train primary health workers to identify symptoms. And sometimes we go for the pneumonia, we go for the medical symptoms, but our primary health workers are not trained to identify potential mental health issues. In no way we have to reinforce the social protection network. And another thing that for us is very, very important is preparedness. Is the disaster risk reduction, the early warning, how we have to be working with community leaders, with young people, with people who really can prepare for what is going to be a normal in our lives. I mean, Pakistan floods will happen again because the glaciers in the Himalayas keep melting. So what have we learned from the horrific biblical floods last year? How we are going to prepare all those children and young people to be coping. It's absolutely what you said. I was in Balochistan and Sindh just 6 months after the floods. Thousands of families have moved to Islamabad, to Karachi. Imagine what it is to be living a rural area, very rural area, and arriving with absolutely nothing to the slums of a big city. I mean, that's really, with nobody there to support you. So we in UNICEF, with many other partners, we really tried to be making sure that whenever the city was receiving these new people, there was a structured approach and a structured support to the thousands and thousands of families who were arriving. But of course, apart from mental health and psychological support, you also have to give immediate support on safety, on housing, and on social cash transfers and others. It is also, for us, very important when we have the recurring hurricanes in the Caribbean. When you have the hurricanes in Honduras, or you have the hurricanes in Barbados and others, how you, every year in schools, in communities, people understand this is our new life, how we cope with it, so it's not a threat impossible to surmount. It's something that especially little children have to understand. They are going to be protected. They are going to be as safe as they can. Their families will remain together. So it's very important to do all that preparatory work, so when the disaster hits, people know, and especially young children know that, okay, they are going to be taken care of. They are going to be, again, going to go back to a safe place to live, perhaps not in their village, but perhaps it's going to be a place where they can rebuild their lives, as you described so well. 50 million children under 18 are displaced every year due to climate hazards. I mean, 50 million is an enormity. Most of the displacements are in the same districts, in the same regions, in the same countries. That's sometimes the worst impact of, on mental health. But also we have many other impacts. 40 million children, but growing, see their education disrupted. A lot of kids in Pakistan have never returned to school a year after the floods. All those impacts are real. And we cannot, also, we mentioned, this is not a health response. This is an integrated response, and it has to be integrated with the social protection systems, with education systems, with the health systems. And also, we have to put words to it. Still, and you were saying something that I was very impressed, my parents don't know the anxiety I had. Still, kids feel embarrassed. They feel, oh my God, my family is going through so much, I don't want to add to the burden. So they don't talk to anyone about how they are feeling this anxiety. And we have to stop, of course, with the stigma of mental health. We have to stop with the stigma that to talk about eco-anxiety is, oh, these young people, they are just angry and they are only talking negative things. No, it's a day-to-day, it's a reality, and only with, first of all, with data. We need research, we need data to prove the case. Even here, COP, this is a legal process, this is a scientific process. We have very little evidence to prove why a strong investment on health in the adaptation on loss and damage has to be invested in mental health. We have not made the case because we don't have the data. So one important thing here is how to make, and we know it's long term, we know that in mental health, 2 plus 2 sometimes is not 4, 2 plus 2 can be 7 or 8, but we really, unless we make that effort, we are always going to be lagging behind. The other thing, of course, is to try not to be just in one silo approach. This is not just health. And I think that that's another thing that hopefully with the adaptation goal, we will manage to do that. And the third one, I would say, is listen to the children and young people. I think those are the ones who are going to tell us what they need. The worst thing that can happen is that we treat this situation on mental health challenges, on climate, the same way we treat any other illness. Because this is not the way to go, and also in this case is going to require a much bigger effort. But to end up in a positive note, we did at UNICEF before COP a very interesting analysis. It was a poll with 10,000 young people between 13 and 17 in 35 countries. We call it the eco-optimism poll. And we just talked, what are your most effective strategies? What are your most effective choices to cope with your new world? Because it's a fact that it's a new world. And it was extraordinary because we have answers from Uzbekistan, from Uganda, from Peru, from Germany, and it was all the same. They all said they just wanted 3 things. One is they all want to feel they are well prepared to jump into the green economy. They can see that their future is going to be on green jobs. As many of you here younger than me, I hope when you were in school you saw that your future was digital. And you have to become digital natives because every job you wanted was going to be that. Now people realize we are going to be working on green economies, we have to be able to jump on it. The second thing was we want climate education. Very few of them receive any education in school. And the third one, we want to be able to do something about it. And when they talk something about it, most of them say we want to do something in our community, in our neighborhood, perhaps in our city, but to feel that to fight their eco-pessimism, to fight the anxiety they are living, if they are doing something and they see the impact for the people they love, they care, that really is going to make a difference. So I would like to say that, please, let's make sure that when we talk about mental health support, it's not only when the issue is there, it's also when we can be doing something about it to help the kids to cope what is a reality, and it's not going to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Paloma. Maybe a last statement, a quick statement. Okay, so I think we got a very comprehensive account of the multiple burdens of planetary crisis. There is hope because adaptation is on board along with mitigation. And we've heard from our panelists that there could be several gateways to put on agendas that have been under-reflected in several COPs. It took us 28 COPs to bring health on board, for instance. With that, I'd like a sort of a micro statement from all my panelists. Do we see hope in COP28 discussions on ensuring human well-being? That's the very core of climate policies and actions, human well-being.
So I think we are all here together every year, not here, but at every COP, climate COP, because there is hope. There is hope that we can make global change happen through such a big agenda that happens every year, and we keep it on, in everybody's mind. So I think there is always hope.
We have hope.
Always hope.
Transitioning from fear to hope.
Yes.
One statement from you.
Yes, one statement. I'm very excited to see the Declaration on Climate Health adopted yesterday. But of course, we have to monitor how this declaration will be implemented in concrete action. And we need to work together as a team to see that the health and well-being will be mainstreamed in the climate action.
So collaboration to bring hope.
Thank you.
Okay, so are we hopeful, Jekulin?
I'm hopeful, but with emphasis on key points is that when we set our goals, it has to be equitable, just, and working towards a sustainable world where our planet and marginalized communities could thrive together.
Thank you. Paloma?
I think that COP28, hope is not enough. We have to move from hope to action. I'm just waiting for in a week's time, what are the final outcomes and resolutions. And I will be very hopeful when I see that in writing and with paths to keep discussing in coming COPs how we are going to be investing in people and how we are going to be investing in health, including mental health, and UNICEF, especially investing and protecting the most vulnerable children in the planet, being the first victims of climate. So I'm very hopeful that the pressure of all of us will lead us to more action than in previous COPs.
All right, that's lovely closing word. Fear to hope to action. Thank you, our UN panel.
Now I would like to invite our second panel, Insights from Research, Miss Emma Lawrence from the Imperial College London and Connecting Climate Minds, and Miss Keika Shambas from Green Hope Foundation, Canada.
So will you be going there to make your presentation? You can make it from here. You can see the TV.
I think either way.
Either way.
Okay. Can I see the panel on there? Slides on. Can I see the slides if I'm there?
Yeah, you can also see it here and there, both.
Either or you.
We are also going to hear from two researchers who will give us insight on approaches, tools, methodologies, even challenges on how to generate data, information, and evidence to support our argument. This will be very short snapshots from two programs. Emma Lawrence from Climate Care Centres, Imperial College London, will have the first intervention.
Thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure. 2 years ago, the Climate Cares, what was a program, now a centre, was the first to host a mental health event at a COP. Now, 2 years later, the fact that we have Health Day, the fact that mental health is in the declaration, that we are all here for many different climate and mental health events is wonderful progress. You know, it's never enough, but it's wonderful to see. So thank you for having me here today. Will the slides come up? Oh, great, I can go through. Great, so I'm here to summarize research in 4 minutes. It's a hard ask, but I'll try and give some headlines. So climate change, we've heard from the panelists so far, is a massive risk multiplier. It's multiplying the risks for already vulnerable and marginalized communities, including those with pre-existing mental health challenges or vulnerabilities. But the flip side of this is that climate action can be an opportunity multiplier, including for mental health and well-being. At the Climate Cares Centre, we're hearing stories from around the world, and we are seeing and contributing to research that shows that farmers are sadly dying by suicide as another drought hits and another crop fails. Extreme weather events that are escalating in frequency are no longer giving communities time to heal before the next onslaught hits, or before the long tail of impacts on food and water insecurity, economic insecurity, forced migration, community breakdown, health system disruption, leads to compounding traumas that are rising rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, substance misuse, anxiety, depression, and sadly deaths by suicide. We know and have heard about how young people are feeling hopelessness and despair as their futures are mortgaged to pay for record profits in coal, oil, and gas today. This can mean there's a vicious cycle at play where those mental health impacts are undermining the ability of individuals, communities, and health systems to make the transformations needed to better cope with and act on the climate crisis. We've heard from an amazing farmer, for instance, in Kenya, turned clinical psychologist based on her experiences, who's gone back to help her communities and has seen rates of 30+% in her research of anxiety, depression. She's saying, it's great we have drought-resistant crops, but how do we plant them if farmers can't get out of bed in the morning? And when I talk about mental health and well-being here, I'm talking about both mental health problems, but also about the general emotional well-being of whole communities. And this can be counted also in economic costs. We need more data on this, but there's a paper this year showing that the cost of climate hazards, air pollution, and inaccess to green space per year by 2030 will be $47 billion from the extra mental health burden due to those costs. And that will escalate exponentially to over $500 billion per year by 2050 without action. In terms of psychological and emotional responses, we've heard mentioned already terms like eco-anxiety, climate anxiety. We know that there's about 27 times the Google searches for climate anxiety this year than a few years ago. And this is because everyone is experiencing their own emotional and psychological response to the climate crisis. We all have our own response in this room, and it can be a whole range of emotions that we feel. And this is understandable and healthy to feel distress in the face of the threats. And we know that this is not just the worried well. The data shows this is not just people in the global north. It is people who are experiencing climate events who have the highest rates of eco-anxiety and where that distress impacts the most on their daily life and function. So while it is understandable and even adaptive to feel distress in the face of the threats faced, and it can mobilize action, without support, and especially on young developing minds, where 75% of mental health issues start before the age of 24, that stress is a challenge that we need to address and provide opportunities for support so that those impacts don't worsen mental well-being as we are seeing in the data around the world. But it is possible to hold that distress and have high well-being if there are opportunities to foster meaning, to foster hope, and to foster hope through action. We just heard about we don't need hope, we need action, but actually we can create hope through our actions. And this can mean there's also a potential for a virtuous cycle, where there's common causes and interconnections, there's also common solutions. And the state of our minds are connected to the state of our worlds in both directions. And what this means is that when on an individual level we take action, there can be these potential well-being benefits, but also at a systems level. So when we have clean air, access to green space, active communities, and connected communities where there's stronger social support, where there's less loneliness, those are the communities we're hearing are better able to cope with the mental health impacts of the climate crisis, but also that's what the IPCC reports say is needed in order for us to make climate adaptations more generally. The IPCC reports say that adaptation is no longer about bouncing back, resilience is no longer about bouncing back, it's also the capacity for transformation. And this means we need to include local voices, local knowledge, and communities. And that's what the research says is the most effective, but also that's what the mental health research says will help people best cope with those emotions and distress and protect mental health and well-being. So there are these win-wins. And fundamentally, what we see and have heard already from the panel is the need for connection. The need for connecting traditional wisdoms and science, the need for connecting the many solutions that already exist around the world in the global south and in the global north, in countries and communities that are already coping with these impacts, and learn from each other, connecting research and policy, connecting climate and mental health. And so we're working on that with a Wellcome-funded project called Connecting Climate Minds, which works with communities of practice, building 7 regional communities around the world, embedding research, policy, lived experience, practitioners, NGOs. We've had dialogues across the year, and we'd love to tell you more about it at 3 p.m. in this room. And we're creating agendas to move forward for research and action that are aligned and inclusive. And we'll foster all of this on a global online hub. So I was also asked to briefly talk about the opportunities for digital innovation. You'll hear from Katie Hayes from Canada in a moment, and there's some wonderful work happening there. We know within research we need to have data. We heard that even though there's enough evidence to act, that data can really help make the case for action. And collecting that data can really help use innovative digital tools. For example, the ENOOC program, which Katie, I'm sure, can answer your questions about, is working with Inuit communities who can use an app to monitor environmental and physical and mental health. We're also seeing work with big data from social media as a way to track sentiment of populations, and we're seeing that with higher temperatures and precipitation, there is reduced positive sentiment. Also, in terms of responding, we hear in Connecting Climate Minds the need for, it's not only the health system that now needs to provide mental health support, it is the community that needs to provide that. And we need continuous access to care, including through extreme events, and digital tools can be part of that. In terms of digital innovation, I'd also just like to quickly finish by reading this is part of a speech that I'd just like to read to you. In conclusion, let's stand united in the face of climate change, recognizing its impact on mental health. Together, we can be the change agents that our planet desperately needs, promoting both ecological and emotional well-being for generations to come. Thank you. That was written by ChatGPT. So we have tools, we have technologies to do this work. We have innovation around the world. We just need to bring in the human element to this, the human connection. We have the technologies, now we need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. So in the context of time, would you like to just take the stage, Ms. Kekoshin Basu, founder of the Youth Climate Action Organization, Green Hope Foundation, Canada, and you have 4 minutes to give your intervention.
Thank you, and hello everyone. Delighted to be here today to share this space with all of you. As was mentioned earlier, I am the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, which is a global organization working across 28 countries with over 500,000 people turning research, research that is very much led from the ground up into ground level action, because working in some of the most climate vulnerable communities across the world, we recognize every single day how data is a tool that can be used for good, but unless something is done with it, it will remain just that, data and research. So we turn that into ground level action. And what our research on the ground shows us, as we all know, is that climate change is very much affecting the mental well-being of people, particularly women and children in these most vulnerable communities. So today I will be sharing 2 examples of the work that we have done to turn the research into ground level action. The first example that I share is from the Sundarbans on the Indian side, the Sundarbans being the world's largest mangrove forest. And within the Sundarbans, we work to empower tiger widows as fish farming entrepreneurs and through mangrove restoration as well. Now, we are seeing how climate change is leading more and more to the destruction of these ecosystems and thereby the lives and livelihoods of the people who live within these mangroves, which of course causes immense psychological stress because they don't know what the next day is going to hold for them. But for these women in particular, known as tiger widows, they are women who've lost their husbands to tiger attacks, and tiger attacks are actually increasing because of climate change, because climate change induced increased salinity is leading tigers into human settlements instead of staying within the more dense mangroves. And these women are seen as bad luck, like bad omens. People don't look upon their faces before going to weddings, for example. They are seen as social pariahs, completely ostracized, and because of that, lack access to the basic resources to live a healthy life. And of course, that has tremendous psychological stress, because just imagine how you would feel if you had to go through something like that. So we are now working with them to provide them with entrepreneurial skill sets for fish farming, wherein we are repopulating their with indigenous fish, their local ponds, and enabling them to keep 40% of the catch for themselves, and then they sell the rest to gain financial stability. And we've actually seen through our research that turns into action, that this financial stability is enabling them to be better equipped with the tools and skill sets to address their mental health. And of course, it leads to greater psychological safety as well, knowing that they have the ability to support themselves and not just be ostracized as social pariahs. And with the mass mangrove restorations that we're doing with them as well, it enables them to kind of rebuild the natural barrier, the mangroves, against climate change-induced disasters, which has the additional mental safety net that we're helping them to build. And the second example that I'll share is now with our youngest members of society, the children that we work with globally in different parts of the world to address their mental well-being through our Grow Your Own Food campaign. And a lot of the time we see this alarmist approach surrounding climate change, and that of course has a really negative effect on children in particular. And so we are working to put forward the more positive undertaking of what it means to be responsible environmental stewards, and connecting with nature is one of the best ways that we found to really not just connect with nature in that sense, but also to improve their mental health and well-being. So our Grow Your Own Food campaign enables them to see the results of the fruits of their labor directly and understand that they can create change, and that is what gives them hope. So we see that in Suriname, working just outside of Paramaribo, more so within the Amazon, with at-risk children who are deemed to have mental health issues and therefore, again, ostracized from their communities. And so we're working with them to reconnect with nature. And we've actually seen how building a simple kitchen garden for them is able to improve their mental health, in the sense that they are now able to go out into society and work better with their peers. In Canada, on the farms that we work with school children to enable them to reconnect with nature as well, fostering mental well-being. And in Caribis, we work on creating these agricultural boxes to grow their own food because they are suffering from the impacts of climate change-induced water insecurity and food insecurity due to the soil being increased, like the salinity is increasing in the soil because of climate change. And with that simple action of being able to grow their own food and see, again, the actions bearing fruit, we are able to work to improve their mental health and well-being as well. So I wanted to share these examples here today to show that just like how climate change has no one solution to solve all of its problems, the intersection of climate change and mental health as well requires a lot of different solutions to come together to maintain hope. But at the end of the day, it is really about understanding that if we lose out on hope, we can't really go anywhere. And that is why we named our organization Green Hope Foundation, because we know that through the actions that we take every single day, turning our research into actual actionable steps, we are able to maintain that hope for a brighter future for all, where everyone has a life of dignity. Thank you.
These are wonderful insights for us to take as reference on how to use hope and action as a twin framework to devise pathways. And that's a good segue for our government panel to come on board. I will also request our special guest and our closing remark representative, Mr. Darmit, to be on the stage. Charlotte, Kitty, and Madame Marianne. So we are very delighted to have state representatives from UK, Belgium, and Canada, and also a representative from World Health Organization to give the closing remarks. We have heard so welcome my state panelists. We have heard our UN representatives. We have heard advocacy and academic sector representatives who have given us some insights on what modalities can be applied to fix this nexus, to address and understand and acknowledge the nexus of climate change and health, particularly in the context of mental health and psychosocial well-being. So maybe in the sequence of the arrangement on the floor, Councillor Ms. Maureen Overton of Lancashire County Council and North Western District Council, leader of the independent group and Council of European Municipalities and Region, CEMR. Madam, if I missed something, then I'm sorry for it. But would you like to give an account of how your state, your constituency, your region is taking note of this nexus? And what kind of programs, initiatives you have in place to support communities and stakeholders?
Thank you. That is a mouthful. I'm representing all of the local governments of Europe, so that's 130,000 councils here today. And it does mean that there is considerable activity right across the board. But I also work within the UK, the Local Government Association, where we represent all the councils of England and Wales. And then again, I'm also working on the ground, which is important always. You have to keep your feet on the ground. And I also represent a small area, nearly 1 million people in Lincolnshire, and then a small area of my own constituency. So I see things at all levels, is the point. Mm-hmm. And with mental health, I think I might start at the bottom, and where we have some local incidences where we have people really distressed and unable to cope. So we have a charity called Relate, so we work with charities to try to bring in support, mainly because the government health services for mental health are inadequate. They cannot do the job. We've got more and more children coming forward with significant problems, and they're very expensive to care for. up to £10,000, even £30,000 for a week for an individual child. That means 5 staff, effectively, all the time. And you can see why it is so important to try and prevent the issues arising. And so with climate change, what we are seeing is an increase in cases. We have more and more children coming forward with more serious cases. We also have more older people and adults with difficulties as well. And it has stretched our resources to the point where I had a young teenager recently came, well, a little while ago, and his mother called me desperate, needs emergency support. We could do Samaritans, you know, a charitable thing. You can take them into care, but even that is very difficult, you know, because it's expensive and there's a very narrow gate. So it meant that in the end there was very little we could do. But we did get started from that. As our county council, we create contracts, we employ people to do things, and we did set up a new contract which provided a very frontline service. So if somebody just wanted a conversation and so a starting point to try to work towards the prevention. And then we also have some further backup with the internet. So there's a lot now available that you can work with. And I know a lot of youngsters particularly go on to certain the sounds of the sea and a little bit of talk, you know, to help them settle down. And I think that is working. And it seems a simple solution, but, you know, for those initial stages, if you like, and the prevention, it's actually really critical. A night's sleep means a lot. The other thing, I think, with the fear of going out, we had a flood incident recently in my area. We had 30 dwellings that were flooded right up to the windows, so a lot of water. One of the households had a person with mental health difficulties and another person who, both elderly. They phoned the emergency services, nothing. They were told, just stay in your house, stay upstairs, don't touch the light switches, don't get out of bed, stay there till the water goes down, which will probably be a couple of days. Just, you know, nothing from what it meant. What it shows is how vital the community services are that you mentioned before. And in one of my villages, we have an emergency plan agreed, and every year it's updated who can do what in the village. And that village in particular, the one that's especially good at that, was amazing. On the WhatsApp, within hours, you know, we're in the village hall, in 2 hours' time, get there, and everybody's filling sandbags and, you know, helping each other, someone's delivering. So, I mean, that local self-help action is absolutely vital, no matter how clever and developed we are. It's actually that relationship that you might have with a neighbour, that somebody's prepared to come and help when you need it. And I think the last thing I was going to say is about the increased pressure on resources. The councils, I don't know if you know the word council, municipalities, our local authorities, have been squeezed significantly with funding. And we pay our taxes. I keep complaining, we pay our income tax just the same. Where's the money? Why isn't it coming down? And it is a problem because we have these increasing demands, but actually less coming down in taxes. And when the resources are so short, that's when authorities tend to hold on to what they've got, reduce what they provide, and that, of course, is completely counterproductive. So just when people need more, they get less. And that's why I think it's vital that our governments our local governments and our central governments take a decentralizing approach, a local approach, and recognize the value of local councils in the documents that are coming through today, but also local people and just how much the organizations and even getting ourselves organized on the ground, just how much we do. All of those steps are necessary. Individuals working together in councils, working together with governments, and our governments working together here. We need everything. We are facing a dire emergency, and it's not improving. I'm waiting for us to get to that breaking point where we suddenly go much faster in terms of how much we are achieving. We're doing so much, but the battle is still raging. So I'm really pleased to see you all here today. And I think together, when I think of the skills and the talents that we have here at this COP28, that's what will get us through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. I think very, very relevant comments in sort of emphasizing the cost of care that we have to budget in climate financing, all the funds that we are collecting and pledging. The community health systems needs to be reinforced. The pressures and tipping points needs to be kind of integrated. And thank you for bringing the mention of multi-level governance. That's the very heart of operations in the European region, at least. So I think if we can put it in action, even for deployment of health support systems, then we may cross some barriers and reach some destinations. One thing that we have collectively acknowledged in this room, right from Australia to Argentina, Canada to Cambodia, mental health issues are common. Challenges are common. Solutions can be replicated. Success stories can be shared. And with that very spirit, I'm so delighted to have with us Ms. Katie Hayes, Senior Policy Analyst, Health Canada. And I'm glad, and I personally know that Health Canada and Canada as a state has dedicated resources, done research, and has taken leadership role in putting mental health on the climate discourse. Katie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak amongst you all and those that came before. I'm really happy to be here today to talk a little bit about some of the actions we've taken in Canada, and noting that there are so many more actions that we all need to take. So in the Canadian context, some of the things that we have done are our Canadian Climate Change and Health Assessment. For the first time, we've included a dedicated chapter on mental health, noting the impacts of climate change on the mental health and well-being of our communities. And in this, we really highlight the research, and we look at the global research and bringing it into the Canadian context to describe who's at greater risk, and we know that those who are at greater risk are those who are already experiencing health inequities, are Indigenous peoples, youth, children, women, people with pre-existing health conditions are at greater risk of experiencing poor mental health outcomes from climate change. We also talk about normalizing some of the experiences that people are having. Feeling anxiety, feeling anger, feeling frustration. This is normal. These are normal reactions to the climate crisis. And it's really important to bring that to bear as well. And we not only focus on what are the risks and impacts, but what are we doing about it? And in this room, I'm sure we've heard about all of these wonderful initiatives that are already taking shape. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to addressing the mental health impacts of climate change. That's well understood. So what is it that we're doing? How do we work collaboratively? And what's next? So in the Canadian context, what's next is we established our first national adaptation strategy. And part of this national adaptation strategy required a whole of society, a whole of government coming together to talk about climate change risks to society. And there was a specific health and well-being component. And what we really wanted to have an understanding of is what are the climate change risks, what are the adaptation strategies that need to take place. So we met with stakeholders from a variety of different institutions, but we held a specific roundtable on mental health and equity and the climate change impacts that we really need to bring to bear. And this was a really important step. And this was in tandem noting that in Canada, we're very fortunate to have not only a Minister of Health, but a Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. And having the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions at that time at the table, and experts who are in this room were also at that table to bring a real voice to the types of strategies our national adaptation actions need to take. So with that, we have the National Adaptation Strategy, and now we're trying to implement that. And that implementation from the health perspective is really focused on building climate-resilient health systems and also addressing the heat health impacts. And the heat health impacts, as we know, are not only the physical health impacts. In Canada, the Western heat dome that hit us in 2021, we see from the BC Coroner's report that those who are at greater risk were those who are already experiencing health issues, particularly mental health issues, and also noting that those who are at greater risk were actually due to indoor heat issues. So we're investing in research and actions that are addressing the heat health impacts, and in particular, some of the research that we have that is currently ongoing that I understand my Belgian colleagues are also working on is looking at the heat health impacts on those with schizophrenia and also the heat impacts on medications, so antidepressants and antipsychotics. In tandem with all of this, over the last number of years, we're investing in our health authorities. So in Canada, we have a federated health system. And so what this means is that we really work with our provinces and territories to support climate change and health actions. So I was fortunate to work with our Health Adapt program. So this was a program that ran from 2019 to 2022 and is ongoing. And it's really about establishing the research base, looking at vulnerability and adaptation assessments, and supporting communities to amplify the actions. And as part of this, folks were looking not only at the physical health impacts, but mental health. So we had one specific jurisdiction looking at the mental health impacts of flooding. So these are just a few examples of what's being done, but as I mentioned from the outset, this is not something that we need to do more. And I think this is a collective opportunity to do more. And just thinking about the original question that you had asked earlier about hope, I think at times our hope can waver, but we're tenacious, and as we come together as a global community and we collaborate together, that's where we're going to start to see many of these actions take place. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie. Now from our Belgian representative, Ms. Charlotte Scheerens, also from representing Ghent University, Belgium. Would you like to share some comments about your work and that of your state on how they are addressing this nexus?
Yes, thank you very much, Nidhi, and thank you for having me at this panel. So I do not represent one of the Belgian governments, but I'm a researcher affiliated also with Ghent University, UNICEF, and I'm part of quite a few working groups for the government, one on just transition for the federal government, and one on health and climate for the Flemish government, given our health system is fragmented in Belgium with our several regional and federal governments. I would like to share a few insights first on indeed what happened in 2021 in Western Europe with the floods. I think for Belgium, the main focus areas with regards to climate change, environment and health are heat and heat waves and associated pollutants such as ozone concentrations, particulate matter, and now recently also extreme events such as what we experienced with the floods. So there's kind of a shift in attention with extreme weather events that started now with what we experienced in 2021. I think some of the outcomes of how we saw the emergency health response was organized specifically also looking at psychosocial health response, which was one of the research projects that we undertook, is that it was very chaotically organized. Also, it was during the summer. I think many of our support systems weren't prepared for an emergency like that. And so what we currently are assessing and still is interviews, in-depth interviews that we conducted with impacted citizens, but also with involved health workers, ranging from primary care doctors, Recently, we also interviewed the fire department coming from one of the cities in Flanders. And I think that was really important because not only citizens were heavily impacted, but also the support team that had to kind of provide support for more than 48 hours during the floods. And a few examples is that also relates to resources and capacity and infrastructure. For example, the emergency rescue boats of the fire department weren't well prepared to do rescue operations in rivers that were full of debris and big chunks of garbage, let's say. And so several incidents happened where even citizens were trapped in their houses, did not survive, also due to the fact that there wasn't enough infrastructure and resources for the correct material. So I think that's like one issue. And a lot of other issues arose with the fact that our medical teams could not access citizens who were trapped in their houses to provide medication, especially those who are in need for chronic medication, think people with diabetes, but also people who were already experiencing psychosocial or mental health problems. They had to change the law between brackets very quickly for example, mobile pharmacies to access people who were trapped in their houses. Another important point that I would like to raise is insurance system, very much related to what we saw and could call administrative burden. For example, there's no obligation to have a fire insurance in Belgium, and people who are experiencing financial constraints often do not get a fire insurance just because it's too costly. What happened then, those households living closest to the river, we saw those were having, those were the most who did not have a fire insurance, and so they had to wait the longest for financial compensation. Really, that causes a lot of financial stress and also has a mental health impact. So there's this kind of double up burden with those who are already experiencing mental health problems caused to a myriad of reasons, and this is added up. So I think that's really like a focal point. I think for research and our policy to first invest more in research and in data, because to be honest, it's really difficult to assess the association between certain environmental events and a certain health impact. It's really complicated to give like an exact association, and a few reasons for that is that the lack of data, also the delay in health data. In Belgium, we collect data centrally collected through our health insurance system, but there's a 2-year delay in this. So if you want to match or if you want to do quick responses, that's already an issue. So I think that is one. And then also the capacity of our health services. We all know after COVID pandemic, the demand for psychosocial support has increased. And so there's just not enough availability of health workers to meet that demand. And with the increasing temperatures, what we see during our summers, I think that's another point we need to work on in Belgium. And I think the last point, it is really complicated with a fragmented health system to provide an integrated response, either during an emergency like the floods. It was extremely chaotic because all the different units were coming from different levels in the country, going from federal to local. And so that led to very different approaches in different cities as well. And I think a lot of work can be done in the area of prevention. We need better health surveillance tools and also early warning systems, because we also heard from interviews that those who were exposed to the floods, that has a mental health burden, and if they would have been evacuated earlier, they might have not experienced the stress of what happened there.
Thanks,
so
Charlotte.
Those are a few points. Thank you very much.
I think it's nice to hear different perspectives, and we can also see and map common challenges. And there's a lot to take stock I can summarize in 3 words. Well, I'd like to give the closing words to our special UN representative here, Mr. Dermot Campbell-Lindrum, the unit head of climate change and health at WHO, and WHO will be our guiding agency to bridge this gap, Dermot. We'd like to have some words of hope from you.
Thank you. Well, sincere thanks for the invitation to this panel. It's an incredibly difficult one to sum up and make closing remarks on. I've rarely learnt so much and had so many thoughts about connections as I've had off this panel. It really has been fantastic. So a couple of people have referred to the fact that for the first time ever, we've had a health day. We have a COP declaration. That's a form of hope. I was really reassured, if I got it correct from Mr. Katsuma, that we do have mental health within that. If we had not had it in there, we would have missed the boat, because it has to be physical and mental health. And having worked on climate change and health for a long time, this is my 20-year anniversary of coming to COPs, I can date the time at which we started to get demand on mental health and climate change. I was at a pre-COP meeting in 2019. I was approached by a young Dutch researcher who had been cycling around the Netherlands to do her research. It's Holland, of course, she cycles around. She was saying she said, what are you doing on mental health and climate change? I said, not very much. She said, that's the one thing that I'm picking up in my research. That was almost the first time I heard it mentioned. I don't think there's been a climate and health meeting I've been to since where it hasn't been brought up. So it's absolutely being pulled into the mainstream. And at WHO, we are absolutely aware of this. We are building it into everything we do. We published a policy brief on climate change and health about 18 months ago, our first statement on the issue. We worked closely with our mental health colleagues, and it was a really informative thing because they were imposing discipline on us as to what we could say about the links between mental health and climate change. And although it may sound conservative, it's really important because they were telling us that if we get the terminology wrong, the definitions wrong, if we make bold claims about this without the evidence, we confuse the problem, we end up stigmatizing people who should not be stigmatized and so on. And they confirmed that there's really very good evidence, and we've heard many of the stories and the evidence here today, of the mental health impacts of extreme weather events and the things which climate change is making worse. So they said, on that, you're absolutely solid. They said that it's less clear, we don't have good definitions for things like eco-anxiety, solastalgia, and so on. We need that. I have the impression from what I've heard we're starting to get there in terms of the evidence base for this. But that's really important. The evidence is critically important. But the fact that we don't have complete evidence doesn't mean that we can't already act. We already know enough to act, and we should be applying the precautionary principle because it seems very clear that letting climate change rip, failing to protect people from the health impacts of climate change, that doesn't sound like a good idea, including on mental health. So I think I'd just like to, in a couple of remarks, just to bring it back to the discussion of young people and climate change. It was a very a strong message and a real pleasure to hear from Ms. Jekulin, Lipi and so on, who brings that perspective as others have as well. Because we see that young people are being hit in many ways by climate change. They're hit by the direct impacts of climate change, extreme weather events on their lives through the flooding, through the extreme weather. So they're hit in that way. They're then also hit by the fact that they are having to contemplate a future in which people have not taken appropriate care of their future. So I think that should be our reference point as we go forward with the evidence, with the action, and so on. And you did ask me for hope. And I think you can never go wrong in a climate change meeting by quoting Greta Thunberg. And I'd just like to remind people that Greta Thunberg and the movement, the Fridays for Future movement, there is evidence that that has had direct effect on people's environmental behavior. And as an impression I have from being around COPs for a long time, it's my belief that has shifted more, the conversation at COPs more
Excuse me, dear speaker. Sorry to disturb you, but the time is up and we have another organizer waiting outside. Okay. So they'll be starting in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So but just a reminder, but that story didn't actually start as a climate activism story. It started as a mental health story. It was the distress of that person wanting to take action, which has actually probably had more effect on the climate negotiations than anything else. So to quote her, you come to us asking for hope. We need action. When you act, hope is everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. So maybe in the next COP, we need a mental health day with support of WHO.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.